Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
I want to talk some green and gold for a little bit this morning, as there was a little bit of a news update yesterday. Packers, according to Tom Silverstein, are bringing back Luke Getsy. Now, Luke Getsy had been spending some time with Green Bay at the end of the season after being let go by the Raiders as their offensive coordinator returned to Green Bay. Very similar to a Robert Saleh type of role. And our good buddy Rob Domofsky had noted that expectation was that, Luke is probably going to get a position on this team. And Tom Silverstein has reported that they have signed, or that they will hire Luke Getsy to a full-time position as offensive senior assistant. Now, that role could potentially change depending on whether they decide to fill the quarterback's coach with somebody with an outside hire, or promote Sean Mannion to it, or could Adam Stenavich potentially find another offensive coordinator role? There are some of those rumblings out there. He did interview for the Seahawks job, for the offensive coordinator job. Did not get that. But apparently he's been getting some talk about some other offensive coordinator jobs out there too. Reading a little bit here, Stenavich has received some interest around the league for a promotion. The Bears interviewed him for their head coaching position before hiring Ben Johnson, and Seattle interviewed him for their vacant offensive coordinator position. There are offensive coordinator positions open for Houston, the Raiders, Jets, Dallas, Saints, and Tampa. So Stenavich could potentially look at potentially get over there too. And I know there's been other rumblings about him potentially looking at going to an offensive coordinator position where he could call plays. And that's something that Matt LaFleur did in his career too. Was offensive coordinator for Sean McVay, wasn't calling plays, goes to Tennessee under Mike Vrabel, calls plays, then he's a head coach. So maybe Stenavich is looking to follow that same path. So if he leaves, maybe that's where Luke Getsy also steps in. Regardless, Luke Getsy's back on the staff. And Getsy has spent 2 prior stints with Green Bay, one under Mike McCarthy, one under Matt LaFleur. And he has coached wide receivers. He has coached quarterbacks. He was first of all, he was a quality control coach for Green Bay from 2014 to 2015, then promoted to wide receivers coach from 16 to 17. Came back to Green Bay after spending a year as an offensive coordinator at Mississippi State. Came back to Green Bay in 2019 as the quarterbacks coach. And then 2020 to 2021 promoted to quarterbacks coach and passing game coordinator. And then last couple years, he was in Chicago for 2 years as the offensive coordinator, then last year with the Raiders as offensive coordinator. So has experience, obviously, working with both receivers and the quarterbacks. Now, Jason Vrabel is currently working a little bit with the wide receivers, also their passing game coordinator on the offensive side. He's potentially mentioned as maybe an offensive coordinator candidate elsewhere too. But you're bringing back a coach who's familiar with a lot of the players and has spent some time as offensive coordinator, got experience there, but experience in other position groups. So, good, awesome, cool. Bring him in. I'm okay with it. The one move that maybe has grinded some Packers fans' gears, and how different the world changes in the last couple of years in the sports world. But Rich Bisaccia also signing an extension to stay in Green Bay, according to Tom Silverstein. Just reading a little bit from Silverstein's piece. Bisaccia, one of the highest paid special teams coordinators in the NFL, had 1 year remaining on his contract, according to a source. It is believed another year was added, guaranteeing that Bisaccia would have plenty of incentive to stick around at least 2 more years. There were league sources who said there were rumblings that Bisaccia might retire, but the new deal assures he'll return as special teams coordinator and Matt LaFleur's game management advisor. 2 parts to that. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a new role, a new title, a new duty job duty for Bisaccia with the game management advisor? Because, I mean, we've heard of another assistant on staff, Connor Lewis, was Matt LaFleur's always talked about him, and that was kind of his role. So I don't know if this is going to be a new role, an additional role for Bisaccia, if that's always kind of been a role that maybe hasn't been talked about, but he's kind of been there. Because, I mean, if you can remember, I mean, a lot of games there's been sideline video or camera shots, LaFleur and Bisaccia talking a lot in different situations and such, kind of just maybe getting the feedback in that. So be curious to know if this is something new for Bisaccia, if this is something he's already kind of been doing and such. But if there has been a major critique for Matt LaFleur, especially this past season, it has been maybe some game management decisions. So it'll be interesting to see if this is new or not. But the thing that's probably grinded some Packers fans' gears has been the play of the special teams, especially this year. Now, rewind it to a couple years ago when Rich Bisaccia was hired. I mean, it was like the football gods smiled and Green Bay finally invested in a special teams coordinator. You finally got one there, and you were feeling pretty good. Now, a couple of years later, you have quite a few Packers fans that want to move on, want to get somebody different into this thing. I understand the frustration. I get it. I completely get it. I'm on board. I mean, you had special teams blunders, coverage blunders, and all that. The question I have, though, is how much of it is the coaching? How much of the blame is the coaching, the coordinator coaching? How much does it fall on him? How much does it fall on the personnel again? Because remember also, too, when Bisaccia first came in, it felt like Green Bay was like, okay, they're bringing in veterans to help with special teams. Remember, Rudy Ford was initially brought in to help with special teams. Levitt was brought in just to help with special teams. Eric Wilson was originally brought in just to help for special teams. 3 veterans who had spent a lot of time just playing on special teams. Those are moves to help bolster special teams. Levitt got cut, was it last year before? Rudy Ford, not there anymore. Spent more time last year playing safety when that whole rotation. Eric Wilson's been playing more on the defensive side. So you have younger guys playing in a defense or on a special teams role. Again, it's still the coordinator's job. It's still the coach's job to get those guys ready, to get those guys prepared and to play at a high level in special teams. Because whenever we get to training camp in the preseason, what does everybody and their grandmother say about these rookies or these guys, undrafted rookies or late-round rookies? What's the best way to make a team? Special teams. Playing on special teams. So, even if you're young and inexperienced, you still have to perform on the special teams. So, to me, it's going to be curious to see, does Green Bay, we talk about free agency and we talk about going out there and acquiring players, does Goody build depth, but also with the purpose or with the thought in mind of improving special teams coverage units or other areas of the special teams? You know, I think Bisaccia was kind of dealt a hand that was pretty hard to win. And I think, but I will say, I think part of the reason Green Bay, and this is just purely speculative on me, I don't know. You know, you draft Anders Carlson, and I think part of it is like, okay, Bisaccia is familiar with the family, knows Anders. Obviously worked with his brother Daniel Carlson in the Raiders, so there's some familiarity with it. I do think there was something to that with drafting him. And then you're flushing in kickers left and right, and you finally get a veteran in McManus that kind of settled it down. I thought Daniel Whalen was fantastic this year. So for some of the inefficiencies, and I know some advanced numbers point to the fact with some Daniel Whalen punts and all that, but I mean, with the eye test, I think we all saw Daniel Whalen was a pretty darn solid punter this year. So while there were some positives, you got to give, if we're going to blame Bisaccia for all the negatives on special teams, do have to give him a little bit of a tip of the cap with some of the other stuff that were positives. But I look at special teams and I'm like, okay, if Keyshawn is serious about not wanting to return kicks, and Green Bay is going to oblige by that, then where is the return? I mean, and I know the returns are kind of rare now with the whole kickoff returns and such, but that's an area you're going to have to address. It's an area you're going to have to address that punt return. You know, do you still want Jaden Reed out there returning punts? Do you want to focus a little bit and save him for the offensive side of things? I think you have to factor that into it. But it definitely is probably it's been grinding some people's gears about the return of Rich Bisaccia. To me, I'll be honest, I'm kind of neutral on it right now. I don't have one, like, I'm not one way or the other, like so adamant one way, like, God, that was an awful decision. How dare this team do this? And I'm not to the other side of like, oh, pumped up, excited. Yes, they're keeping him here and all that. I'm kind of in the middle right now. I'm kind of in neutral here. And part of it is I want to see if they do anything in the offseason to maybe help bolster that. You know, I think it'd be big just to keep those three specialists together too. Bring back McManus. Have Daniel Whalen. Have your long snapper. Have those three. Orzik. Have those three just continuing to work with each other. So I'm kind of neutral at that point. But I do think kind of maybe like LaFleur. All right, now let's see some improvement in terms of some of the coverage stuff and some of the other inefficiencies out there, especially the stupid penalties on special teams. Just the stupid penalties. And that's, again, where I don't know if that's mostly coming from the youth and inexperience on special teams from those guys. Just stupid penalties on special teams. Holding in that. And I get it. At times, it's hard. Guy blows by you on a gunner. Yeah, it's maybe just human reaction, instant reaction to throw your arm out there and grab him a little bit. I understand that, but this is also your job. Okay, it's also your job. So I get it. That maybe is a little bit of the inexperience and the youth coming through, but it still needs to be better. And I honestly think the first person to tell you that it's got to be better is Rich. And it's Matt. It's got to be better. The whole operation's got to be better. You can't fly by doing how it overall played out this year. Let's start off first with our off-season self-scouting. So we've taken a look at various position groups. We've talked about coaches. We've talked about defensive line. We've talked about offensive line. We've talked about wide receivers. We've talked about corners. I want to spend a few minutes now taking a look at the linebackers, and we're talking the Quay Walkers, the Edgerrin Coopers, the Eric Wilsons, the Isaiah McDuffies, that group over there. So I think when you start with the linebackers for this team, I think you start with Edgerrin Cooper. Now, Edgerrin Cooper, a rookie this past year, missed a couple games, but being named a NFC Defensive Rookie of the Month, Defensive Player of the Week a couple times over there, I think our fans' enthusiasm surrounding Edgerrin Cooper right now is sky high, through the roof, arrow trending so far up that we are so excited to see Edgerrin Cooper continue to get better and continue to evolve at the linebacker spot. To me, Edgerrin Cooper is the most purest tackling linebacker that I can remember in Green Bay for a long time. I mean, finally, and I know this is kind of a blanket statement, but finally, there were so many times, and the one game that always just kind of comes back to my memory bank is when they played Minnesota that final game of the season, and it looked like there were holes for Aaron Jones, and then all of a sudden 56 is flying through and taking down Aaron Jones. And finally, we've got a linebacker who was, reading and reacting and getting to those holes and tackling a guy, at the line of scrimmage for a 1-yard gain. Not just a linebacker, yes, racking up the tackles, but how far, past the line of scrimmage were they racking up those tackles? Was it 4, 5 yards? And Cooper has showed so many glimpses this year of a guy that just instinctively might be the best instinctive linebacker we've seen in Green Bay for a few years. I know I'm putting a lot of eggs in that basket after a rookie year, but there was just a ton of plays to like from Cooper this year, and not just stopping the run, but I mean he was getting after the quarterback and such. And you look at a lot of these top tier defenses, top tier teams, and you look at their linebacking group, who's in there, and you can always kind of tell there's one playmaker on that defensive side, and I think Edgerrin Cooper can be that difference maker, can be that playmaker on the defensive side. Don't know if he'll be a Hall of Famer. I mean, he's got a lot of football left to be played, but I think when you're looking at that linebacking group and you're looking at 56 and you're looking at Edgerrin Cooper, you've got to be feeling pretty good about that. And rightfully so. I know, again, after 1 year, it doesn't tell you everything, but it's okay to be optimistic about it, and it's okay to be excited about the future with Edgerrin Cooper here. So I know the coaches kind of maybe were tempering down expectations throughout the season whenever fans and some of the media peeps were getting excited about him, and they would always ask the coaches about him. They're like, yeah, he did good, but he's got to do better at this. No doubt about it. I mean, there's definitely things that he's got to get better at or more consistent at. Just got through his rookie year, and I expect that to happen. And that should be the expectation moving forward for Edgerrin Cooper. Getting better at the areas that he struggled at. Being a consistently fantastic, great defensive playmaker, linebacker in that group. And I think he can be that guy. I think between him and Xavier McKinney, you got a couple guys on that defensive front that can be game changers, that can be difference makers over there. So I'm pumped about the future with Edgerrin Cooper. I can't wait for the next few years with Edgerrin Cooper. Now behind him, there's maybe some question marks. And I think you start first with number 7, Quay Walker. I feel like Green Bay, they're going to be picking up his option and such. Quay Walker, we saw some glimpses of Quay Walker this year. There was the 2-game stretch. Was it? I took down the schedule here. The San Francisco one, and I think it was the Miami one, where it's like, oh, okay. See, that was the Quay we have been waiting for. That was the Quay Walker we have been hoping for. A guy who's hitting a hole and hitting them at the line of scrimmage, making plays in the backfield, sideline to sideline. That was the version we have wanted to see. The issue, after year one, after his rookie year, the biggest issue for Quay Walker was like, stop getting in trouble and stop getting ejected. That hasn't been an issue the last couple weeks or couple years. Now the issue has just been consistency. Where can we get a high, consistent, excellent play from Quay Walker? Because I'll tell you, I'm very intrigued about a combo of Cooper and Quay Walker. I think you have two athletically gifted linebackers out there that could cover a lot of space for you, that could do a lot of different things. The only thing I do question is Quay Walker the right man to play middle linebacker? Is he the right guy? Is he better suited to play on the side, a weak side, a strong side? Is that his better role? That's one thing I maybe would like to see different with Quay Walker. And in turn, could that help him be more of a consistently good linebacker? Because we've seen those flashes. We've seen those plays. And I think too many times Quay Walker in his young career has gotten to the point of like he's thinking too much. I mean, it was the first game against Chicago. There was a play where he could have hit Caleb Jones, went after, but it was like he pulled up for whatever reason. And I think that's at a point where you're starting to think too much. I don't know if he was thinking, okay, I don't want to get flagged, or I don't want to hit him and get flagged, or whatever the case may be. Just reacting, playing and reacting. It's that point where you're so comfortable with your play, you're just going out there and balling. And I think that's been one of the downfalls of Quay Walker, and he's mentioned it before. He's mentioned it a few times, like just getting in that mindset of not overthinking and just playing. And if he were to move from the middle linebacker role, would that help alleviate some of that, where he's not thinking as much, doesn't have that responsibility? I want to get the best out of Quay Walker. Whether that's at strong side, that's at weak side, or middle, wherever. I want the best version of Quay Walker out there. Because if we get the best version of Quay Walker and the best version of Edgerrin Cooper, and they're out on that field together, you can cover a lot of space. You can do a lot of things on the defensive side. You can get very creative. After that, then it's kind of a big question mark. Now, Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson, they had their moments this year. There were games, there were plays that were like, oh yeah. And throughout the season we talked about Eric Wilson needs to play more. Isaiah McDuffie deserves more snaps. Again, it was the consistency thing when it came to those guys. But I do think Green Bay needs to look at, okay, can we still get better at this spot? Can we improve in that third spot? And I know a lot of the base defenses now are nickel, where you're taking away a linebacker. So if you're taking away a linebacker, you're probably going to keep Quay and Edgerrin out there. But I still would like to see maybe Green Bay just get a little bit better, a little bit more talented when it comes to their linebacking situation. And if you go with a straight base, 3 linebackers, I'd like them to get a little bit better, upgrade over an Isaiah McDuffie, and upgrade over an Eric Wilson. The question is how much of a priority do they feel like that is for this team? That's the big question. But if they can, and maybe I'm stuck in my mind of some of the old, I should say old, but, some of these linebacking groups where you're like 3 deep and, you're just like your 3 out there are just studs. And remember the 49ers teams with Harbaugh and Vic Fangio? And I know that was a 3-4 defense, but you had Bowman, you had Patrick Willis, you had those guys over there, and it was just like, oh, load it up there. You ain't running the football on them. But when you look at, if it's straight up base, you got Quay, you got Edgerrin Cooper, you got Isaiah McDuffie. I know Hopper was a draft pick last year. I don't know if he could transition into a role somewhere on there, but boy, I'd sure like maybe a little bit more of an upgrade and pairing up another linebacker with Cooper and with Quay Walker. I'd like to see it. Maybe Cooper goes to middle linebacker. I know he played that a little bit here too. Maybe he's got the instinctives to play that middle linebacker. I mean, the dude surely showcased that with some of his reads that he potentially could have that possibility. The biggest thing for him, the biggest adjustment is going to be being the signal caller, being the guy with the green dot on the back of his helmet. But I would look at maybe it's the draft. Maybe it's a late day 3, day 4 pick. Maybe it's a veteran free agent. I mean, you look at a free agent signing that has worked wonders in this department, that has made a huge difference for a team this year. Look no further than the Philadelphia Eagles and them signing former Badger Zach Bond, where he was in New Orleans, and New Orleans kind of just kept him as a special teams player. He goes over to Philadelphia, gets a shot, becomes like an all-pro linebacker, and becomes a focal part of that defense. So it is possible to go out there and maybe find one of those guys, free agency. A guy that has spent a couple years in the league, maybe hasn't gotten his chance to be a starter on the defensive side. But maybe there is that possibility. I'm looking at some of the free agent linebackers that potentially could fill that role. I mean, Bobby Wagner's up there in age. Devondre Campbell, no. No thank you. Looking at some of the maybe inside linebackers. Levante Davis up there in age, though, too. But you've got Eric Kendricks is up there in age. Oh, man, Denzel Perriman's already almost 33. Devin Bush is out there, but Chris Barnes, bring him. Oren Burks, I mean, for crying out loud, Oren Burks is filling in nicely for the Eagles right now. Former Packer over there, too. But maybe there is a guy out there. Maybe there's a guy that deserves a shot to be a starter, and you can get that Zach Bond effect like the Eagles have gotten this year. Now, I don't want to go through the whole list over here, but there's some options. Jack Cochran, that might be an interesting one over there with he's a restricted free agent. Never mind. So, but no, to kind of wrap it up, I wouldn't mind. Yeah, Zach Bond's a free agent too. They only signed him for 1 year, but I got to imagine they're going to give him a big deal after this. That'd be too cool. That'd be too perfect. I wouldn't be opposed for Green Bay to find another linebacker to pair up with Walker and Cooper. In the terms of priority of the list of where that's at, it's probably, if I had to rank them, fifth. I mean, we've already touched on the top four. But yeah, I would like another linebacker. Depth, but also maybe another starter, a base starter to pair up with Cooper and Cooper and Walker. But what does Green Bay have to do? What are the things that are holding them back? What are the issues? What's keeping this team, in your opinion, from being the Eagles, from being the Chiefs, from being a Super Bowl contender, from competing for championships, as Goody says? You're watching these games over the weekend or watching the postseason, and you're sitting there thinking, like, man, what has Green Bay got to do to get to this point? To get over that hump, to just not being satisfied with getting to the postseason, but winning in the postseason and getting to the dance, the big dance, not just the big dance competition, but getting to the finals. What do they got to do? I think the big one for me is, and it was something that I think plagued this team in the regular season, but your star players, or your main players, however you want to phrase it, your high-priced players, they got to play at that level. They got to play at a high level. You look at some of these teams that have advanced, whether it's the Eagles or Chiefs, or heck, even the Commanders at a certain, up until the NFC Championship game, or the Bills and such. How do they get to those situations? Their players, their main players, their top players, played like top players. Saquon Barkley is the perfect example of this for the Eagles. Dude is an MVP candidate. He is their top player. He played like it. We talked about Zach Bond for the season he has had. He has been playing like it. Chiefs, I mean, yes, and I know it's not fair to compare Patrick Mahomes to a Jordan Love and such, but their top players performing at a high level, and the margin of error when you get to the postseason is so incredibly small. It's so incredibly small. One mistake. It's like Al Pacino in the movie Any Given Sunday when he's doing the inch-by-inch speech. 1 second too fast or too slow, you don't quite catch it. 1 inch too short, you don't quite make it. And Green Bay, to me, was that team this year where their top players either were just a little bit short or they didn't rise to that occasion and play like leaders of this team, like the top players of this team. You can name them. We've talked about some of the more disappointing players this season. Kenny Clark's, Rashawn Gary's, the drops from the wide receivers. I mean, that was such a huge issue, and you look at some of the catches that have been made in this postseason, it's like, dang. But those are playmakers making plays. Those are the big-name players, your best players making plays. And I think that's a big thing for Green Bay now going forward. Hey, could it happen with more experience? Sure, why not? Who the heck knows, though? And I'm getting tired of using that excuse, too. I think there's a little bit to it, but for crying out loud, you're a professional. This is your job. It's time to do it. Players need to play at the level of the expectation that is from them. We expect Jordan Love to play like a top quarterback. That's got to be he's got to play at that level. We expect, Kenny Clark to be dominating the line of scrimmage because he's getting paid for it. He just got a new contract. We expect that. It has to happen. You invest a lot of money in a player like that, you better be getting that ROI, that return on investment. And I think it's fair you didn't get it from 97 and some other players this year. You had a lot of money invested in 2-3, and I know injuries derailed it, but you didn't get an ROI on it. Your top players have to perform, and your coaches have to perform at a high level too. Your coaches are not immune to that. They have to perform at a high level. They have to call a game at a high level. They have to manage the game at a high level. There were certain points. I mean, you look at these coordinators or whoever calls the plays for some of these teams. Andy Reid, play caller as a head coach. Again, I don't want to compare Matt LaFleur to Andy Reid, but if Matt LaFleur wants to get to a Super Bowl, there's no better mentor right now than Andy Reid. What he did from a play call standpoint, what he's continued to do over the years. Steve Spagnuolo, defensive coordinator for the Chiefs, what he has done. Coaches also need to perform at a high level. That, to me, is the main thing. How does Green Bay get to this? Their top players and their coaches have to play up to that moment. They have to live up to that moment. And this year, they didn't in a lot of instances. They didn't. And you look at the two teams that are left standing right now. Philadelphia bringing in two new coordinators, two new play callers. Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. They rose to big moments and big challenges. Andy Reid and Spags just continue to do it. Player-wise, Saquon, he did it this year. Kelsey, Mahomes, they continue to do it. Chandler Jones on the defensive side, they continue to do it. That, to me, is a big thing over there. It starts from just rising to that moment and playing up to that level, and your top players having to do that. And you've got to limit the mistakes. You get to the postseason, you've got to limit your mistakes. You've got to limit the penalties. You've got to limit shooting yourself in the foot. That was probably also one of the biggest things to plague this team this year. The self-inflicted wounds. Whether it was stupid penalties, whether it was turnovers or whatever the case may be. And sometimes not able to overcome those. Good teams, championship teams, can overcome some of that stuff. We've seen it. Chiefs did it in the AFC Championship game. Mahomes fumbles, Buffalo scores, didn't really derail them. And I think that's a little bit of a problem with Green Bay too, is like when they do have that turnover, whether it's a pick, and it's not to say that every time. I mean, a lot of times, we hear Jordan Love is so even keeled even after he's, turned the ball over and such. Awesome. But is everybody else? And that includes coaches. Is everybody else as even keeled? Like it doesn't bother them? Can they overcome some of their self-inflicted stuff? And I feel like at times this year, they did a really bad job of it. So that, to me, are just some of the things. And we can break down different points and position groups and all that. But when I look at it from a bigger picture overall, what is holding this Packers team back from being where the Eagles are at, or being where the Chiefs are at, or being a Super Bowl contender? It starts with your main players, your top players, your players that you're paying to be difference makers, actually performing at a difference-making level, your coaches coaching at a high level, and limiting mistakes.